I'm sure you're familiar with this camera clamp thing that I made. It's pretty janky and it uses rubber bands to hold everything in place, but as some of you very rightly pointed out, the rubber bands are starting to fail. I tried to combat this a bit by rounding off the corners so that there wouldn't be as many sharp edges for them to catch on, but the rubber's just getting really soft and it doesn't have as much squeeze as it used to. So it's time to do away with the rubber bands and replace them with these beefy springs that I found. So with the rubber bands off, you can see a bit more clearly what I was talking about with the rounded corners. And I've also added this nut here that lets me put it on a tripod if I really want. My plan for these springs is to bend the end here into just more of a point that I can shove into a hole on one side. The other side has a little eyelet that I can screw a screw into. So I can just mark where I need to drill a pilot hole, and I can do that on both sides. And I just eyeballed the hole on the other side, making sure that there would be at least some tension even when it's fully collapsed. These are the screws that I'm planning to use, and they just are big enough to not need a washer. So using those screws as a guide, I can find the right drill bit and start drilling some holes. So if you saw my last video, it was about the sewing machine, and I got some machine oil for it, and I put some on the hand drill, and it sounds so much better now. So much quieter. Can't believe I didn't do this before. It's also like way smoother to operate as well, which is nice. With all the holes drilled, I can try and bend these springs straight, but they must have hardened the end or something, because as you can see, the pliers were bending more than the spring. So I had to change tactic, and instead of trying to bend, I just tried to squeeze, which didn't go so well. Ooh, that did not sound good. I think it must have been hardened because it was super brittle and it just cracked instead of bending. So I was going to have to come up with a different solution. Thankfully, I had 3 of these springs, so it wasn't that big of a deal that one of them snapped. I had a vague plan, so I just decided to go for it and screwed the springs on with the eyelet side, which was the easy side, and then had to figure something out for the other end. And this was a highly sophisticated solution called a nail. So I just tested it out by jamming a nail in the hole and used the pliers to eventually get the spring over the nail. And this is where I started to realize these springs are really strong. Obviously, I didn't need the full length of the nail, so I actually cut one down to use the 2 halves on either side. And then I could try this thing out for real. Oh my god. And it is way too strong. There is almost no way that I can open this thing up wide enough to fit my camera in. I maybe should have seen this coming. So I could end my friendship with the big springs and bring in some new, smaller springs that I'd found. Even though they're minuscule, they do actually pack a bit of a punch. So I could figure out roughly where the spring would end, mark out some new positions, and drill some new holes. And using some more clipped down nails on both sides now, I could fit some springs and see how it works. And the springs aren't strong enough. So I decided the reasonable thing to do was add more springs. So I just put an extra spring on each side, or at least tried to. Oh. And the 2 springs worked perfectly, but the nails sticking out the side are a bit janky even by my standards, so I decided to bend them so that they would be out of the way and hold the springs on better, and I decided to do this completely off camera for you. I could then clip them down as well, and do the same thing to the other side, before filing any of the sharp bits off. And then I could put my double springs back on each side. The first one went really smoothly, but the second one gave me a lot of grief. And I can't even blame Sausage Fingers for this. This is like a pure skill issue. The fact that only one spring flew away was actually a blessing, because once I eventually found it, I put one spring on at a time, and that made it so much easier. And it's occurring to me only now as I'm watching this that I could have just screwed the springs into place, but maybe that will be a future update. Either way, the springs now work really well, and they're not going to wear out like the rubber bands did, and they hold the plate in there really, really snugly and really well. So there you go. That's the spring upgrade for the camera clamp.